Amazing. Okay. Thanks everyone for joining another episode of the Diverse Podcast, the number one careers podcast on the planet, which is definitely a fact. My name's Toby. I'm sure you're familiar with me by now, and I'm here as well with Kudzai, who's going to give a quick intro in a moment. But anyone who's tuned in right away, do listen all the way through. This is going to be a really good episode for you, especially if you're interested in a career in science, health, that sort of domain. But even if you're not sure about what you want to do in your career, then there's going to be a lot to learn from the journey that we're going to be talking through today. So definitely do tune in and really make notes. And subscribe as well if you're not already, wherever you're watching or listening, so we can keep this coming for you. But Kudzai, how you doing? Why don't you give a quick intro to the people?
I'm doing great. Really happy to be here and excited to be sharing, my journey with your audience. So my name is Kudzai Nyamondo. I am a Sanger CR UK Excellence Research Fellow. So basically it means I am a postdoctoral researcher at the Wellcome Sanger Institute.
Awesome. And what are you researching currently? Give us a little bit of an overview of what you're currently on top of right now.
Ooh, that's always a difficult question to try and, condense into a few words. But basically, the Wellcome Sanger Institute is a very large genomics driven institute. And so most of the things that we do there are around, genomics. So I am particularly focusing on cancer genomics. And if we break down a bit further, I am looking into blood in general. So looking into what are the genomics around the formation of blood, or how it is that blood lasts in human beings. And I've got a few projects there that also involve cross-species projects, so comparing the aging of blood between human beings and different species of animals as well. So that kind of gives us insight into things like blood malignancies. So those are the leukemias and how they develop in different species.
Wow, incredible. And for anyone who doesn't know, how would you describe genomics?
So genomics is the study of your genes, and that is the basic component of who you are as a human being. So if you maybe go back to high school biology, in the nucleus, there is the DNA. So what we do is basically look further into all of those DNA strands and probe them further into any changes that may happen. So all of the changes that can happen in your DNA strand that lead to a change phenotypically. So something that we can observe that is what we would call a mutation. And some of these mutations are the reasons why things like cancer they arise quite a lot because of a mutation that happens in your DNA strand. So that is what genomics kind of encompasses. Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah, that's nice and simple, easy to understand. So the work that you're doing with regards to blood would essentially help us develop an understanding of maybe the changes we see in DNA and sort of predict cancer far in advance and essentially save lives by being able to detect early. Is that the general idea?
I mean, that is the dream. The hope is that with a better understanding of how some of these mutations present themselves in your genome, we can be able to possibly time them in some cases. So quite a lot of the time, by the time that a blood malignancy is diagnosed, it will actually have been around in your body for a few years. So it's kind of trying to study the patterns of how those mutations are coming up. And is there possibly a way that we could actually intervene at an earlier time point? Because quite a lot of the time for blood malignancies, especially something like acute myeloid leukemia, late intervention could mean that you're actually not able to lead someone into a better space of, or a better life, if I can say it like that. So if there is any possibility of earlier intervention, or even just understanding what are the basic mutations, those are the things that also inform some of the treatments that are on the market as well. So yeah, it's basically asking all the big questions on why, how, and what. Yeah.
Wow, amazing. Well, congrats to you, first of all, because it sounds like an incredible space to be in, and what important work to be on, right? And I think that's the first thing that stood out for I think probably people who are interested in or thinking, is a career in science right for me, or genomics, or even the Excellence Fellowship, which we'll talk a little bit more about, is how important that work is in terms of actually making a tangible difference to the lives of other people, because there's always this crazy stats about how much you spend, how much of your time, I think half of it is like sleeping and work altogether or something like that, but it's a lot of time. And so I often think you could be doing anything, so why not try and go for it and like make an impact and change the world, which is like, yeah, but that obviously is the aim of the space and the industry that we're talking about now, which I think is incredible.
Definitely. I think the dream is always to impact lives in some shape or form. And if you're able to do something that's quite fulfilling, I mean, it's always a big plus for whatever it is that you're doing. And it's kind of like a boost um, when work gets hard, especially. So, yeah.
Definitely, and yeah, I feel a small bit of that, but I can only imagine what it's like for you. But well, obviously, right now you're on the Sanger Excellence Fellowship, and I want to take a step back and hear your sort of career journey. But that fellowship will be live when the audience is listening, so feel free to go and check that out and apply. It's an incredible opportunity with the Wellcome Sanger Institute, which we'll get into a little bit later. But go and check that out. It'll be linked in the comments. But Kudzai, why don't you take us a step back and explain how you got to where you are? Because I think you've got an interesting backstory. I think it's inspiring. I think it's something a lot of people can learn from as well. So yeah, feel free to take it from where you want to. But yeah, how you got to the UK and sort of found your way into this position you're in now.
Yeah, of course. So I was born and raised in Zimbabwe, and I moved to the UK in 2013 for my undergraduate studies. So I guess I moved to Aberdeen, so that is on the northern side of Scotland. Very cold, very grey, but absolutely stunning. So I was studying at the Robert Gordon University there. I did my first degree in bioscience with biomedical science. And after that, I then went on to do a master's in clinical pharmacology. So I moved to Glasgow for that. Um, and at the time, I got to engage with different modules that were, specifically looking into drugs and what that looks like within different disease models. So from cardiovascular to cancer as well. And then shortly after that, I then started my PhD, still at the University of Glasgow, and that was at the Paul O'Gorman Leukemia Research Institute. And as the name suggests, it's all about leukemia. So there are different niche groups that are within one building that all focus on addressing the different types of leukemia. For my specific PhD, I was looking at chronic myeloid leukemia and specifically looking into how the bone marrow microenvironment supports leukemic stem cell persistence. So leukemic stem cells are basically the cells that lead to a cancer arising. So it was trying to understand how your bone marrow sometimes can change to kind of support all those processes. And I just recently completed that. I'm assuming by the time this podcast is live, I will have actually done my Viva and passed. And following on from that, I then started my postdoc here in Cambridge, and that's funded by the Wellcome Sanger Institute and Cancer Research UK. And it's also following on from that blood malignancy story, but just looking at it from a different angle, I guess.
Incredible, and that must have been a stark transition, right? Coming from Africa into an Aberdeen of all places. What was that like? Stepping off the plane and just early moments and that kind of thing.
Oh man, it was a reality check, I won't lie. I think I underestimated how the UK would be cold for a start. Because I distinctly remember, walking off the plane with the flimsy little jacket and, took one step out and actually took a step back, and the air hostesses started laughing at me because they were like, "Oh, welcome to Scotland." I think someone should have prepared you for the reality of what Aberdeen is like, because I moved to Scotland in September, so that's when it's getting a bit cold. But it was lovely. I think the people in Aberdeen are very, very friendly. It took a while to actually understand the accent. But then I think as time went on, you kind of adapt because most of your lecturers are Scottish and the taxi drivers who are awfully friendly, they're also Scottish. So you kind of learn your way around it so that you're able to engage. And, by the time I left Scotland, I mean, I would like to think I was able to understand most of the accents there. So that was quite nice.
But it's such a adventurous thing to do, right? In terms of going to a completely different place, different continent, and different accents, and sort of build them from the ground up. I'm guessing you didn't know anyone there, so are you the type of person that likes to jump into those kind of things, those kind of big different challenges?
Um, I would describe it like that. Yeah, I would maybe say I do have a bit of a daredevil-y spirit of adventure side to me. So I think when I was thinking of where to go for my university studies, in the initial instance, this was me, 18-year-old me, and I was just trying to get as far away as possible from my family, who are amazing. But, I just wanted to be able to, go into a new environment where I could define myself based on my own parameters. And Scotland seemed far enough for me to do that. And yeah, it was a rewarding journey, I will not lie. It's such a rewarding journey, and I got to learn a lot along the journey, meet a lot of incredible people as well. And I think one of the main things for me was exposure to systems that are very, I mean, of course, the systems between Zimbabwe, where I was born and raised, and the UK, they are completely different. So it also kind of influences the way in which you imagine what your career can be. And that played a very big role in me getting to where I am right now.
Yeah, interesting. That sort of spirit of adventure, as you called it, sort of really opens up the world, I guess, so geographically, but then also industry wise, right? Once you're in a mindset of being willing to do that, I guess, because I think it can be very tempting to stay in your comfort zone, go to school in this or uni in a similar sort of place to where you grew up, or get your graduate job in the same city, and then you're sort of staying in your comfort zone to some extent. But if you take this sort of big leap, sometimes you go, oh, actually, it's not that hard. And then you might find yourself doing the same thing and going somewhere else and do something completely different as well, or in a different place because you've sort of done that already. So I can imagine that being a really rewarding feeling at the start of your career, I guess, well, your educational journey as well. Because yeah, it's only going to make you more confident to do that in the future. I think that's really interesting, having that like spirit of adventure, definitely. And I would encourage other people to do that as well, definitely. Um, Exciting. And then you also mentioned that you did medicine first of all. So or you at least you thought you wanted to go into medicine. That was your sort of plan A. Talk us through that. What sort of changed from there?
Oh, yeah. So initially, I had decided to take the scenic route into medicine. So quite a lot of people first do a life sciences degree prior to going into a medical degree as a graduate. And that is what I'd set my mind on. I guess based on previous experiences, yeah, I guess that will give a bit of context to why I wanted to do medicine. My brother was born with a tumor on one of his kidneys, and very early on, at 6 weeks after his birth, he had to go into a major surgery to remove the kidney and the tumor as well. I mean, in his case, the tumor was benign, but then it kind of got me interested in all these concepts relating to the human body, which I already was interested, but then I guess that was the framework that then molded everything for me. So, I just started asking a lot of questions about, okay, cancer sciences, and if there was something I could have done within that situation to help, what would it have been? And at that time, I decided it was medicine. I would have been the doctor to, help my brother, cut him up if I had to, or at least understand, the medical terms that they were throwing around at that time. So that's the context in which I came into my first degree.
And just on that, do you think if that hadn't happened, you wouldn't want to go into medicine? And tell me a bit more about that. So you were sort of thinking, I'm not sure how old you were at the time, but you were kind of thinking, well, if I knew a bit more about medicine, then maybe I would understand what the doctors are telling me a bit more. I don't know, maybe give some suggestions, or I don't know, what was the sort of, yeah, tell me a bit more about that.
Yeah, I think it was mainly in high school, because it was quite early on in my high school years that happened. I think 13, when my brother was born. So it was from that stage onwards that I started engaging with most of the sciences subjects as well, and I was quite strong in biology compared to all the other sciences. So of course that was another factor that kind of pushed me further towards medicine as a career. um and I think even before that, I guess there were tiny little bits that I was interested in. For example, if someone was hurt, and I'll be the first one going for the first aid kit, trying to say, okay, I'm going to treat you today, take a seat, I'm going to do all these things with the band-aids. I just loved that whole situation, where I get to attend to a person and help address a person's need directly. So that was the motivating factor. But I think if I can think back to the things that really stood out for me in wanting to then specifically become an oncologist, it was that situation with my brother that it was quite I mean, of course it was very scary, and when people are scared, they do different things. For me, I try and solve the situation. I try and solve the problem. And at that time I felt incapacitated, so medicine was the way for me to solve that. So at any point, if that ever did happen again, I would be able to step up with that authority. Yeah.
And yeah, it's interesting to hear what you were like when you were younger as well, and that having that sort of drive to sort of help in that sort of health sense already. So it's kind of interesting sometimes to think about what we were like when we were younger and what we just were naturally drawn to, maybe when we think about our careers. So because that seems just like for you personally, because I think if you find that, then you're usually just more intrinsically motivated to keep pushing with whatever that thing is that you were connected to. So that's definitely
Yeah.
interesting as well. Yeah.
Mhm. No, that's
And
very
so
true.
yeah, and so you're sort of saying, so you went down, you were thinking, all right, let's take the scenic route, as you say, is just to the
Yeah.
phrase, to medicine, and then you sort of got sidetracked. So that's you changed your mind essentially.
I did. So I guess there were a couple of things that were happening in my first degree that then kind of got me thinking on the broader beyond medicine. So if you're doing a life sciences degree, I'm sure everyone else can attest to this, you're exposed to several labs. So sometimes some people do physiology labs, some people do biochemistry. They're just different types of labs that are exposing you to the laboratory environment and all the things that you need to do within that space. And I found myself enjoying it even more. So just that process of starting an experiment from start to finish, having a project that you kind of plan, like, okay, these are my objectives, this is how I'm going to address them, and this is the result of everything else. I think that for me was quite, I found myself feeling very much so alive in the lab, if I can call it like that. And I kind of took note of it. Just at the back of my mind, like, okay, I do enjoy being in the lab. I do enjoy these moments where I get to either work in a team or independently, as I'm just tinkering about with test tubes and stuff. And then fast forwarding it later into my master's project, I was still getting exposed to more lab tutorials at that time. But that doesn't mean I wasn't exploring medicine as a possible career path. I still was. So I decided to shadow doctors during the time that I was doing my undergraduate degree, just for that exposure element, so that I really decide, is this the career path that I really want to take? And when comparing that experience with shadowing doctors and being in the lab kind of trumped shadowing the doctors. I didn't quite enjoy it. Maybe for me, it was more from the context that I found that for doctors, they had a set of things that they had to sort of like work through for every patient, but then when it comes to being in the lab, you kind of get to color outside the lines a bit, because you are given an open question and you get to decide how it is that you are going to address that specific objective. So I kind of enjoy that autonomy and that freedom to kind of explore. And then during my master's year, they give you a 3-month project within that as well. Um, I was just, enjoying the time in the lab. Any opportunities I was given to do something independently, I would take it and, just run with it. So that's when I kind of realized as well, I guess, because I was working with quite a lot of PhD students at that time. And, I was now just, comparing myself to them, like, but I can actually do what you guys are doing. Not in a way of like looking down on them. No, it's very complex what they were doing. But then I was like, I would love to learn what you guys are doing. And I want to be like you guys. So yeah, exposure, I think it played a very big role in me then deciding to go down the PhD route, because it was me interacting with these PhD students, but also at the same time interacting with medics quite a lot of the time and understanding what it involves, being a medic. I remember being, I think, in undergraduate studies as well. I was part of the Interprofessional Education Society. So that was a society that brought together medics, like all the people who form part of the core healthcare team. So that was medics, nurses, biomedical scientists as well. And through that, I got to learn from each profession, whilst also making a decision for myself, like, okay, do I really want to switch to medicine, or do I want to maybe stay on the scientific route? Yeah.
No, that makes a lot of sense. So you had the opportunity to dive in and try it. So because it's so difficult, isn't it, to make the decision about your career, and especially in this world, because you do need to decide, okay, am I going to do a degree in life sciences or medicine? And that does obviously impact your opportunities further afield. And then you have to think, okay, am I going to do masters or am I going to do a PhD? So unlike marketing, business development, things like that, you have to sort of decide in advance, which I think is even more tricky. But it sounds like your way around that was to one, try it, and I guess find out that you like that problem solving, and okay, can I get to the answer? And I can imagine that being quite exciting, trying to see if it's possible to answer the question and those kind of things. And then also just exposure. So I imagine, in a simple way of saying that, that's just like talking to people who are in the are medics or are PhD candidates, to find out, just get a vibe from them, what it's like, their experience, and if you think that you'd be suited to it as well, right?
Yes, definitely. I think I cannot stress it enough. Exposure is really, really important. It doesn't have to be a formal type of exposure where, for example, you walk up to someone and ask them to mentor you, but just a conversation. You can glean a lot from a conversation. I made it a habit to sit down with my lecturers at some point and ask them, why did you get into the research you're doing? What was your motivating factor? What are the downsides to doing the research that you're doing? Or anytime I would find a medic, I would just, sit them down and just start, picking their brain and trying to understand what was their reasoning behind going into the career that they went into. And yeah, I think that really enriched my experience. Beyond anything else, it was exposure. If I could attend talks as well, quite a lot of the time, I think universities host talks with different people from industry. Sometimes they're medics, just going to sit and listen to what a person is saying. If there's anything that possibly then catches your attention in that process, those are the things that you kind of lean into. And yeah, it kind of helps quite a lot in your decision making process.
Definitely, yeah. And so that, because I think there would be people listening who are trying to decide, okay, do I do a PhD? And I think those are, and I've always wondered this, how the heck do you decide that? Because it's such a big, commitment. Similarly with the masters, really, both are big commitments. There's the financial, there's the time, is that must be tough, right? Because you've got friends who are out with their, starting their jobs and beginning their careers while you're sort of, doing your education. Is that tough?
It definitely is tough. It's not an easy thing to do. And I think it's really, really important to make an informed decision getting into it. And you also understand the things that you might miss out on. So what you have already mentioned, the fact that you will see your friends getting into full-time jobs before you do, and you still need to, stick to your guns. If you chose research, you are going to be doing that for the next 4 years. And I think some of the things that really motivated me into going into research, I was firmly invested in cancer sciences in general. It's something that I found really, really interesting. And the concept of genomics, or even if it's not perfectly genomics, but personalized medicine in general, that was something that I really, really found interesting. And I think you need to be passionate about what you do. That is the thing that keeps driving you forward. Because even within the context of a master's or a PhD, they are not easy things to do. You're having, for a master's, I remember you're having to do, 12 modules in 1 year, and that is a mammoth task. And for a PhD, you now take ownership of a project and, you are the one who's driving it forward. But it doesn't necessarily mean that everything is going to work. Things are going to fail, and quite a lot of the time, I think when you go into a PhD or even a master's, you tend to be on the high achiever side of things, so you're not accustomed to failure, and it comes as a very big blow when things start failing. And I think for me, it was my passion for the subject that kind of got me back up, wanting to ask more questions. I think passion is the one thing that even when things are failing around you, you still have the audacity to go back and face it again and say, okay, why did you fail? Is there a way in which I can change my research question to better, to circumvent whatever it is that has already failed?
Mm. Yeah, that's interesting what you said there about being sort of high achievers, not having that exposure to failure, but then the benefits of those things. I always think back, I used to do, a lot. I grew up doing sport, and I think that's one of the great things about that is you will fail, you will lose, and you kind of grow to not fear that, because you kind of understand again there's going to be more opportunities, and you learn from your so-called failures, and that kind of is the thing that keeps driving you forward. It makes it exciting, right? If you won every time, it would probably get boring pretty quickly. So yeah, I can imagine I can imagine a PhD being tough, but there's sort of like, yeah, that sort of challenge of, yeah, maybe it's not going to go well, but you have to just give your all and go on to the next one if it doesn't work well, right?
You definitely do have to take that on. And also, I guess, seeing it for what it is beyond the project, it is for you to get trained. I think quite a lot of people, you know, they worry about the bigger questions like, oh, what sort of project should I engage in? Or and that is very important. But what is equally important is, who are you going to be after the 4-year period that you're investing into this? So what sort of training opportunities are you getting exposed to? Are you joining a lab that will allow you to get trained in things that go beyond the science that you're doing? When I went into my PhD, I was quite keen on developing myself beyond the bench. So I was keen on, investing into opportunities regarding, leadership. Can I be exposed to social entrepreneurship? I think just keeping on with that theme of exposure, because at the end of the day, there is something that comes next after the PhD. And as you go further ahead in your career, you now get to map what that looks like. You get to map like your own unique formula of what your career is going to look like. Yeah.
Definitely, and it reminds me a little bit of when I was at university, and you kind of yeah, you have those conversations with the lecturer after the lecture, and you go, is this part going to be on the exam? Because you're kind of trying to figure out, what do I really need to know here? But that's not the best strategy, right? Because the whole point is the learning and development and the training, right? So you sort of, and I find now, since leaving education, like having the time or the space to learn just in and of itself is like such a privilege. And most people who like make it and retire like spend their free time learning new things anyway, so focusing on the training, the learning, as rather than just the result, makes all the sense in the world to me. And for anyone who is interested then, and would like to know a bit more, what more could you share with us about the Excellence Fellowship at Sanger? I mean, it might be interesting to hear why you thought it was the right step for you in terms of your personal motivations, but yeah, anything you can share on the benefits, or to give a bit more context, that would be amazing.
Yeah, so the Sanger Excellence Fellowship is targeted towards people of Black heritage that would have done their undergraduate, masters and PhD studies here in the UK. And basically what they are doing is providing you with an opportunity to engage with in a very competitive program for the next 3 years. So my personal motivation for going for it was that opportunity for me to diversify my skill set. So I was trained as a wet lab biologist, and for non-biologists, that means that you're someone who works in the lab quite a lot of the time. And so I wanted to diversify my skill set into embracing some computational skills as well, because that's kind of where the research is going. There's a lot of big data that is at the tips of our hands, and I wanted to know how to manipulate that and also frame that around my research questions. So that was one of my major motivating factors for going towards it. The other thing as well were the opportunities that they are going to provide for you in terms of career direction and exposure. Again, it always comes back to exposure, I guess. That for me was very important. So that's why I went for it, and thankfully I got it. So for my particular fellowship, I am co-funded with Cancer Research UK. So that means that I not only get opportunities from the Wellcome Sanger Institute, but also Cancer Research UK, which is one of the biggest funders for cancer research in the UK in general. So that for me is a platform for me to kind of learn from both institutes and use the tools that are available for me from both of those to kind of shape my career as I go along. And I think you definitely should go for it if you can, if you have the passion for science, and if you're willing to be in a stimulating environment that kind of pushes you to learn, what's cutting edge at the moment, and actually like just work with different people who are doing absolutely amazing work, then it's something to definitely consider. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, that sounds terrific. And yeah, big thanks to, Sanger and Cancer Research as well for creating such an important program. And I want to hear why it's important. Just in terms of the benefits itself, it sounds incredible if you are passionate about science. But there's also the aim of increasing Black representation in health and science. I guess two sort of questions. What's it like? Because I'm sure there's a lot of young Black people who are thinking about these sort of career paths and wondering are they going to be the only Black person in the room at all times, and those kind of things, and hopefully not because of programs like this. But I guess what's that like, first of all, and then secondly, why is it important to increase representation in the world of life science and genomics in particular?
Yeah, I think to answer your first question, it depends on the field. For some fields, you will find, there will be quite a few people who look like you in the room. And for some, they won't. I've often found that I am the only Black person in the room at conferences or meetings in general. And it's not easy in the sense that it would be nice if you could see what you're aspiring towards. So particularly in the higher positions like professors and primary principal investigators as well. Sorry, it would be nice to see whatever it is that you're aspiring towards. I remember it was a couple of weeks ago when I got to meet a Black researcher who had studied at the Sanger Institute, and that for me blew my mind, because in that moment I will never underestimate how I was motivated to go for the fellowship, even more from that point, because for me, in my mind, I saw that someone who looks like me was able to thrive within this community, and this is the result of whatever it is that they were doing. So that is, I guess, the downside of it, is that sometimes you do have to break through without a role model for whatever it is that you're working towards. But I've always found that I've always tried to work with whatever it is that I have. So currently my supervisor is a woman of color. She and she is a female. So for me, those are the two things that I am able to bring together, and I'm able to glean from. She is an example of something that I am aspiring towards at this point in time in my career, and also just trying to learn from everyone around me, because at the end of the day, when you're in some of these rooms, it goes beyond the color of your skin. You are there as a scientist, and I think it's being very confident in your role there as an equally contributing party to whatever it is that is happening within that room. So you do need to kind of be strong-headed about it and just break through the barriers. And because I mean, in my mind, what I'm always imagining is that whatever it is I am doing right now, hopefully there is someone a couple of years down the line who can say, okay, I saw you in this room and I knew there was a place for me as well. And for me right now, it means I may be the only one in the room, but at some point, I mean, there'll be more of us. So, I mean, that's quite a motivating factor for me in doing what I do. And answering your second question, it is important for there to be representation across the different ethnicities in science, particularly because I think some of these health conditions do not discriminate between ethnicity. I think COVID was one of the very big examples of that. It affected every single person on this planet. And that is a prime example of what happens when people have a common goal and they put everything they have towards it. There are now vaccines that are available for people, for people to be treated with COVID and stuff like that. But then you find that in the cancer sciences and maybe for other health conditions, there isn't as much of that representation. But the reality is within that, these disease conditions will present themselves very differently based on ethnicities. And it's quite important for us to have, people who have the motivation, firstly, to look into why it is some of these things are occurring specifically in specific populations. Because at the end of the day, if I am not, I have an invested interest in trying to find out why it is certain things may be, limited to a specific ethnic group. So I think it's really, really important if we can have, representation. And at the end, and also it kind of means that we are picking from a wider talent pool. We also come with a different perspective as to how it is things should be handled. We tend to be very multifaceted individuals who, are extremely talented, and we could use that talent in science as well. So the dream is for science to basically be a representation of the people we are trying to help at the end of the day. There are different patients who come in with different types of cancers and they represent the spectrum of ethnicity. So it would be good if the scientists as well could also represent that spectrum of ethnicities equally.
Absolutely, no, I totally understand that, and I can imagine, it really making a material impact, having representation of different ethnicities to when we're studying, obviously, how diseases impact DNA, because our DNA is different. So it's kind of like if we don't have that representation, then maybe we're not going to sort of, if you're a black person in the room, then you're sort of, I imagine, going to be more so pushing to ask those questions to represent, the sort of the needs of black people and in terms of how certain diseases and therapies could affect DNA. So it's really fascinating, and perhaps even more important than, I think diversity across every single industry is important, and probably even more so here, I would say. So that's really interesting. I think you also said when we spoke the other day that one of the reasons you wanted to teach was to really help be a role model for other people, as you've had for yourself as well, which I think is really important. And so hopefully that carries on, and that's a bit of a domino effect, and you're inspiring other people to do the same. Is there anything else? I mean, we've covered, I think, a lot of advice, like even in, I think, your story, a lot of advice has come from that. I think you've sort of gone through certain things in terms of, you've displayed the spirit of adventure, you've tried and failed things, you've been very open-minded to change your career path slightly here and there, you've followed your passion, you've thought about what you were like when you were younger, and I think in that there's loads of lessons. But I just wanted to see if there's anything else that you want to share just with anyone, who could be anyone, but particularly maybe someone who's going down that sciences career path that maybe we haven't covered.
I guess quite a lot of the time when I talk to people who are engaging with the life science subjects, there is that moment of confusion, like, oh, what am I going to do after this? And what, does the future look like? And I guess I get to comment on this from hindsight. Because I also went through a very similar process where I was kind of, panicked and wondering, okay, what is my career actually going to look like? But I guess what I can say is trust the process, take it a day at a time, and work with the pieces that you don't always have the pieces to the full puzzle. Sometimes you have bits and pieces. So for me, coming out of my master's, all I knew was that I wanted to stay within cancer sciences and I wanted to do something related to personalized medicine. And I spoke up based on what I knew at the time. Sometimes people shy away because they feel as if they don't have the 10-year plan, but I guess just move forward with what you have. It's more than enough for that moment. And you always have opportunities to reframe and kind of change your mind. Like, okay, this is not quite what I want. I get to switch and go on a different career path. But just take the first step. I guess that's the major thing. Take the first step and trust the process. It always works out at some point in time.
Love that, love that. And I guess just finally, I'm just curious to know what do you think's in store for you further down the line? So you've got obviously a few years left on this program, but you must have thought about the future as well. Could you give us a sneak peek, or I guess to your last point, maybe you're keeping really open-minded, but just curious.
I guess, yeah, to my last one, I am keeping it quite, I'm keeping staying open-minded with regards to what comes next after this. But the major thing that I have decided to do for myself is expose myself to different things. So now I get to be within a different circle of influence with people, quite a lot of the time, I'm interacting with people who've been, who've learned at the University of Cambridge. They've got all these ideas, and, people from Cancer Research UK as well. So I will work with that, kind of expose myself to the different ideas that are, floating about, and make a decision after the next 3 years, maybe even well before that. You never know. It's one of those things that I've decided to just take it a day at a time. But the one thing I do know, I guess, thinking long term, is that I would love it if my career would encompass leadership, research that I'm already doing now, some form of primary care aspect to it, and social entrepreneurship. So those are the four things that I do keep at the back of my mind, that at some point in time, I do want to have something that encompasses all four. What that will look like, I'm not sure. It may be that I'm mapping a new role for myself within the world of life sciences. I don't know. So we'll see.
Sounds good to me. Sounds good to me. And probably we'll have to do part two maybe once that's clear, so we can do a before and after kind of thing. That would be cool. But thanks so much, because honestly, for giving up the time to share your story and a lot of those lessons. I think it's really inspiring. And for anyone who is keen, who is really passionate for a career in science and has the eligibility requirements, do please apply for the Sanger Excellence Program. At least do take a look and really dive into it. And just generally, we'll have other opportunities as well with the Wellcome Sanger Institute. So full range of opportunities in sort of tech, and then other science-based roles as well, particularly at the sort of junior and early career stages. So obviously you can find us at wearediverse.io and check out the opportunities there as well. But yeah, until next time, that was the Diverse Podcast, and yeah, we'll see you on the next one.